Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for really being with us to discuss this very, very important issue as it relates to the forever wars and the authorizations to use military force. Today, we have with us the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Congressman Chairman Gregory Meeks, the chair of our House Intelligence Committee, Chairman Adam Schiff from California, the chair of our House Rules Committee, Mr. McGovern from Massachusetts, and Mr. Brown, who is a 30-year armed services veteran, Army, and also served in Iraq and serves as vice chair of the House Armed Services Committee. So welcome to the members, and thank you all so much for your leadership over the years on so many issues, of vital importance to our national security. We're here today to call for action to end these forever wars and repeal the outdated and overly broad AUMFs that Congress passed nearly 20 years ago prior to the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Next week marks the 18th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq. And of course, you know that I did not vote for the 2001 AUMF. That was 20 years ago. And the United States is still engaged in that forever war in Afghanistan, but also, mind you, in a dozen countries with thousands of troops who are still deployed in the field with the authorization to use military force as its justification. On President Biden's first day in office, my colleagues and I, all of whom are on this call and press conference, we sent him a letter stating that we are past due for reexamination of the 2001 and 2002 AUMFs passed 2 decades ago and bears little resemblance to the threats that we face today. Those legal authorities have been used time and time again by successive presidents and regardless of party affiliation. And so we actually, several years ago, asked the Library of Congress, CRS, to do a study and a survey to determine how many times these AUMFs, the 2001, had been used. Over 40 sometimes in approximately 19 countries with little to do, if anything to do, with 9/11. And so it's time that we end these forever wars. We've made substantive progress on this issue. My language to repeal the 2002 AUMF is passed twice last Congress. We've included this, the repeal of the 2001 in the Defense Appropriations Bill. So we really just need the political will to move forward. Revisiting the AUMFs that we passed so long ago is really a step that we need to take to end ongoing wars, bring our troops home, and reallocate our resources to address the very real and immediate threats that we face. And the time is now to do this. We've crafted, again, many of you have that letter. If not, we'll give you a copy of it, but it was crafted and written to the president in a very thoughtful manner with the input of everyone on this call. And in fact, just as far as the Biden-Harris administration goes, we did negotiate the end of forever wars. If any of you read the Democratic Party platform, it's in there. And we think that we will have the House and the Senate with Senator Kaine and the president and all of us here with you today and more. Fighting this year to make sure that we repeal these 2 authorizations. So thank you again. Now I would like to yield to the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Chairman Gregory Meeks, who's been so instrumental in getting us to this point today. Thank you again, Congressman Chairman Meeks.
Thank you, Chair Barbara Lee, and thank you for all of your hard work, especially on this issue. No one has worked and been more dedicated than you on dealing with this issue of forever wars. As you've indicated, September will mark the 20th year in America that America has been at war. This is the longest war in American history. And in that time, Congress has not ever gone back to reevaluate the authorization for the use of military force that was enacted in the days after 9/11, or the authorization passed a year later. And that was for a separate war against the Saddam Hussein regime in Iraq. These two authorities, the 2001 AUMF and the 2002 Iraq War AUMFs, have been stretched far beyond anything Congress ever intended it to do. Given that the 2002 AUMF is not needed for any ongoing military operations, there is no reason at all to leave it in place. And as chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I intend to take up legislation that was written and passed previously by Barbara Lee. I intend to mark up legislation in the Foreign Affairs Committee in the coming weeks to repeal it. The 2001 AUMF is going to be a little more challenging, but I'm committed to working towards an updated authority that is limited to reflect the threats we face today, providing a focused mission and objectives while ensuring it will not be misused in the future. Since the 2001 AUMF's enactment, the war it was intended for has steadily expanded, encompassing new groups and creeping into new countries without any changes to the law. Though we understand these threats far better today than we did 20 years ago, Congress has never looked back or recalibrated that AUMF. So I welcome President Biden's commitment to working with Congress on these issues, and I look forward to working with him on this effort. Under our Constitution, it is Congress's responsibility to decide whether America should be at war. However, the War Powers Resolution has not served as an effective mechanism for enforcing this fundamental balance of powers between Congress and the president. For nearly 50 years since its enactment, presidents have reinterpreted the War Powers Resolution, narrowing its applicability or ignoring it altogether. It has failed to hold presidents accountable to Congress on the decision to use military force. So Congress needs to reconsider how to make the War Powers Resolution work as it was originally intended. The Constitution always empowers the president to defend America, but presidents have stretched their power far beyond what the framers of our Constitution ever intended. Progress on these issues will be difficult. They are among the most consequential issues we have been charged with overseeing, but the status quo cannot continue, and Congress must act. I now would like to bring on the chairman of the House Intel Committee, Chairman Adam Schiff.
Thank you, Chairman Meeks. And Barbara, thank you so much for your years of leadership on this and for bringing us together today. Like Barbara, I share a long history on this issue, having introduced over the years resolutions to sunset the existing authorizations, repeal the existing authorizations, and introduced a new resolution that would be confined in time and geography with much more stringent consultation and notification and reporting requirements. This has been a difficult issue to get across the finish line now for over 20 years. When President Obama was in office, he was supportive of a revision of the existing authorities, but nonetheless, it proved too difficult for that administration and the Congress to accomplish. But things have changed. I have over the years thought about what's the most important power that Congress possesses, and have debated at times whether it was the power to declare war or it was the power of the purse. Ultimately, I concluded it's the power of the purse, because if Congress has the ability to cut off funding for a war, it can effectively end a war. But what we saw in the last administration was the erosion of that power as well, when funding was diverted from the military to build a wall along the southern border. In this Congress and in this administration, Congress is going to reassert its authority. We're going to prevent future presidents from doing an end run around Congress's power of the purse. But we're also going to constrain a president's power to make war in the absence of congressional authorization. And the place to start is repealing these old, out-of-date authorizations. As Chairman Meeks said, I think we can do so with the prior Iraq authorizations without any impact on the president's ability to respond to dangers in that region. The 2001 authorization is more complicated, and I'm glad to see that President Biden has expressed his support and willingness to work with Congress on redefining that authorization to use force against al-Qaeda. And the parameters that we set out in our letter to the president, and thank you again, Barbara Lee, for your leadership on that, set out some of the requirements of what we would like to see in a new authorization. So I look forward to working with my colleagues on this issue, and very much hoping that this is the session we get this done, so that going forward, there's a requirement of congressional authorization that is a meaningful one, and that when we do give our authorization, it is limited in time, in place, and to its intended purpose. And with that, let me introduce the gentleman whose committee will need to go through before it can get to the floor, any new authorization, and that is the Chairman of the Rules Committee, Jim McGovern.
Thank you, Adam. And Barbara, thank you for your many years of leadership on this issue and so many other issues involving ending forever wars and pursuing policies that ultimately lead to peace. And I'm really proud to be on this call with my colleagues here, all of whom have been leaders on this issue. Look, something has been happening over the last few decades. Power meant to be held by Congress, granted to us by the Constitution, intentionally given to us by our founders, has ended up instead in the hands of whoever sat in the Oval Office. It wasn't stolen by any particular president. Congress gave it away. It's been surrendered to Democratic and Republican administrations alike, year after year. And despite many of us who have objected to this, the Constitution is clear on this. The president may be commander in chief, but only Congress has the power to declare war. It's right there in Article 1, Section 8, but Congress has abdicated its responsibility. We have been too content to stand on the sidelines and watch as wars were crafted and carried out by the White House with virtually no input from the People's House. And quite frankly, it's not because Congress was too engaged on other urgent matters, but because many in Congress feared the political risk of a vote. It's because of political cowardice in many instances. We have approved AUMFs that have been way too broad, that have had no sunsets, that have gone on forever. And the result has been these forever wars. Representatives Lee and Meeks and Schiff and Brown, all of us have called for debate and we've called for votes, but too often our calls have not been heeded. So I get it. Matters of war and peace are the most difficult things to consider. But if these are the votes that some members would rather not take, I think they should find a different vocation. Members of our military are willing to put their lives on the line for our country. The least we can do is have the guts to vote on their future. So look, I'm excited to see the emergence of a coalition in the Senate committed to joining us in this effort. I'm hopeful that the White House is willing to work with us to get this thing done. But let's also be honest. You know, when Donald Trump was in the White House, Republicans didn't want to do anything on this, even those who were sympathetic, because they had a Republican in the White House. And I think that was also the case when President Obama was president, that we weren't able to get the consensus and the backing we needed to be able to move on these issues because we had a Democrat in the White House. Look, this is about respecting the Constitution. This is about respecting the men and women who serve our country and our armed forces. And this is about making sure that one of the most important decisions that can ever be made, issues involving war and peace, are done deliberatively and are done in consultation with Congress and are done thoughtfully. So I'll just close with this. Adam mentioned I'm the chairman of the Rules Committee, and I get to make things in order. And so we're going to make sure that these issues get a full hearing. Obviously, the committees that are represented by those on this call, but we're also going to be open to making amendments in order to be able to bring this issue to the forefront. And I believe we will be successful. So having said that, again, I'm happy to be with this group of colleagues who, again, I have great admiration for. And I'm now happy to yield to, as Barbara said, a gentleman who not only served our country in the United States Armed Forces, but who also serves our country on the Armed Services Committee in the Congress, and who has been a real champion on this issue. And so I'm proud to yield now to Congressman Brown.
Hey, thanks, Jim. First, let me thank Barbara Lee for your leadership, all my colleagues on this call, as well as others in Congress who are leading on the issue, this issue, the use of military force, and on restoring Congress's appropriate or constitutional role in defining such use. For too long, Congress has abdicated its constitutional responsibilities. We've allowed wars to drag on and combat operations to expand with minimal congressional action. With the support of President Biden and a new Democratic Congress, I think we have a real opportunity for genuine reform that is long overdue. We need to repeal the decades-old authorization for the use of military force, the 2002 AUMF, and ensure we have a narrow and specific framework that enables us to address critical national security threats while preventing perpetual wars. As Representative Lee mentioned, I was deployed to Iraq in 2004. The justification for that war was fundamentally flawed, yet I and the hundreds of thousands of US soldiers who fought in Iraq did so with a clear mission, albeit misguided, to address the threat posed by Iraq under the regime of Saddam Hussein. It's clear that this mission has long been completed. In the years that have followed, the 2002 AUMF against Iraq has remained law, and the potential for it to be misconstrued for future conflict, as we saw last year, is a risk that we can no longer tolerate. We must take action in this moment to repeal this authorization once and for all. As we approach the 20th anniversary of 9/11, Congress and the Biden administration must also work together to address the 2001 AUMF. And as you've heard, this will be much more challenging, but doable. Originally intended to respond to the largest terrorist attack in our nation and to prevent future attacks by those involved, this authorization has been used far beyond its original intent to introduce our armed forces into hostilities in 7 countries. We have a responsibility to our uniformed men and women to ensure that operations they undertake are targeted, defined, and achievable. We cannot accomplish that with a decades-old authorization that doesn't recognize the realities on the ground. It's time that we reassert Congress's constitutional role in the use of our armed forces. We must repeal the 2002 AUMF and prevent its future use. We must ensure that we have a framework for addressing threats to our nation, and we must fulfill our obligation to our servicemen and women to use military force only as a last resort. So with that, as I've been instructed, we'll now open it up to questions.
I'll remind members of the press to please use the raise hand function or the chat function to ask your question. And I will unmute those who have questions.
Okay, Sean, can you see, are you gonna announce? I see one hand. I'm not sure if I can see them all on this iPad. Andrew Desiderio from Politico. Can you unmute?
Hi, Congresswoman, can you hear me?
Okay, we hear you now.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. I was muted by the host, but I think you can hear me now.
Okay, okay.
Thank you for doing the press conference. I just have a question about the nature of your interactions with the White House on this issue so far. Do you have a sense of what President Biden wants to see in this repeal and replace effort on AUMF? For example, do they just want to repeal the Iraq ones from 1991 and 2002, or do they want to go bigger on this and see a reform of the 2001 AUMF? And what would a replacement look like? I know it's probably very early in the negotiations, but I just wanted to see sort of what your sense is of what the White House wants to see on this.
Sure, I've had discussions with the White House, and my sense is that they want to work collaboratively with us in Congress to help shape whatever decisions we make to move forward. And so that is where we are in terms of no specifics, in terms of the types in terms of the language or the form or the shape of any authorization, any repeal measures, but they definitely have indicated that they would like to work with us to make sure that we're all on the same page as we move forward, and they are committed to doing this. Anyone else would like to respond, feel free, any of my colleagues.
I would just add, Barbara and Andrew, this might have been your reporting for all I know, but I did see recently President Biden made a public statement that he was interested in working with Congress on a new AUMF with a narrower scope, an appropriate scope. So I think he's interested, at least on the basis of his public comments, in both repeal of old out-of-date ones, but also a retooling, rescoping, and recrafting of the probably the 2001 authorization.
And if I could just jump in, Barbara, and this may also address Marcy's question that she put in the chat. I mean, some ideas that have been considered, floated, discussed by members is, as we look at AUMFs going forward, putting a sunset provision on that. There's not necessarily universal agreement around that, but I think that there is a growing consensus that that could be one sort of temporal restraint and force a conversation in a time certain if the executive branch believes that we need to continue the use of military force in a particular operation. The other point I wanted to mention is in terms of the 2001 AUMF, and their discussions about repeal and replace and how do we address the 2001 AUMF. I think the concern that all of us have is that it's just the overreach, and we're now in 7 countries. So there's been thoughts that maybe you lock it into the current 7, and then any use of force beyond that certainly would require coming to Congress.
And if I could just, if I could just reinforce what Anthony just said, look, there needs to be a sunset on these AUMFs. There needs to be sunsets on some of the emergency powers that presidents invoke. I mean, I like to think I'm forward thinking, but in 2001, when we debated this first AUMF, the idea that it would still be applicable to something in 2021 is crazy. And when it comes to issues of war, we ought to be debating that issue, in real time when a potential conflict arises, and whether it's Iraq or whether it's Afghanistan. I mean, one of my biggest frustrations over the years has been very little debate and very little analysis in Congress has unfolded. I mean, we ought to be questioning whether we're on the right track, whether what we're doing is the right thing over and over and over again. That's our job. And unfortunately, I think for some members, these are uncomfortable topics and they don't want to deal with them. Some people who voted for the war in Iraq then, realize that it was a mistake, don't want to be in that position again. Well, that's just too bad. I mean, we have an obligation, a constitutional responsibility and an obligation to our troops to be able to debate these issues.
And I'll just add that in response to your question, that the Biden administration understands this. We're going to work together on language. As I told them that we'll be looking to work and have language that works for all of us so that we can get something done. But one of the things that I think that we have to our advantage is that Joe Biden himself, for over 30 years, was a member of the Senate and a former chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and understands that the responsibility belongs here in Congress, and that we've got to work it out together. So he understands that both Senator Menendez on the Senate side and me on the House side, along with my colleagues, have got to work together to make sure that we take the power back that was given to presidents of the United States. And I believe that he's looking for a partnership in that regards. The
Yes.
hardest vote one takes is the vote on whether one goes to war or not. But we have certain responsibilities, and he understands that. And therefore, I think will be a good partner to get something, to move something so that we can change what currently is with the AUMF. The 2001, absolutely, we've got to work together to try to work that out. But the 2002, absolutely should not be a problem to pass and get done.
Couple of things. Let me just add to what my colleagues have said is one, I mentioned earlier, not that anyone ever reads the Democratic Party platform, but I was on the drafting committee and worked with the Biden administration. And if you read that section of the platform, I think that informs us also of where the president and his administration stand. And in fact, it's exactly what my colleagues have said. Secondly, I have two bills that are, of course, the 2002 repeal, but as my colleagues have said, I also have the 2001 repeal authorization. I want to clarify that even with the 2001 legislation that I have, we have 8 months prior, if in fact the president would sign that bill, we have 8 months to debate and develop the congressional authorization that is necessary, that's specific in terms of a narrowly drawn authorization, if in fact this is what the president feels he needs and the Congress feels it needs for our national security. So I wanted to make sure everyone knew that we have 8 months just based on the bill that I have, because there had been, last time members were not quite clear whether or not we would leave our troops in harm's way with no authorization. I would never do that. And I think I salute Congressman Anthony Brown for his service. My dad was lieutenant colonel in the military 25 years. And to Congressman Brown, listening to you was exactly what my dad told me after I voted against the 2001 authorization. So just thank you very much for your very thoughtful presentation and analysis of where we need to go. Next question, I believe.
Rachel from CQ.
Hi.
Rachel, okay.
Conference. Questions for Congressman Meeks and Congressman McGovern. I understand, Congressman Meeks, that you want the Foreign Affairs Committee to shortly move forward with the 2002 repeal. On the issue of the 2001 AUMF, are you going to, like, what actions by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee are you at all following what they're doing, or are you going to move forward based on what your caucus and perhaps some Republicans in the House are willing to do, or do you want to see what can get done in the Senate before you tackle a 2001 AUMF? And for Congressman McGovern, you mentioned that you're open to amendments in the Rules Committee. Is that for the 2002 repeal, or also some kind of replacement for the 2001 authorization? Thanks.
So in response to you, real quick, the 2002 AUMF, I think that we're going to formulate that language. That's going to be basically what Barbara's bill is. That's what we're going to look to mark up sometime in the next few weeks. So that's pretty much what you will see there. As regard to 2001, no, I'm not going to wait on the Senate. But what we're going to do is to try to have dialogue and conversation among ourselves to see what we can come up with on the House side, where we can negotiate and talk in language along with the administration to see if we can formulate the appropriate language as far as the limitations that should be on a 2001 AUMF. So we're going to be actively negotiating and working collectively together to try to bring something that we can take to the Senate to say this is what we've had agreements upon, to see that we can move forward. We're not going to, sit back and wait. We're going to move in a very expeditious manner and try to see if we can get something that we can all agree with.
Yeah, and the answer to your question, and then unfortunately I have to leave for an event, but we're open to both. Look, as I said before, it is stunning that that AUMFs that we've passed a long time ago are still being utilized today. They ought to be sunsetted. We ought to be reviewing these things on a regular basis I mean, and we just can't put this stuff on, automatic pilot. And so, I mean, we will work with this team that is on this call right now to figure out what the best strategy is. But I think we fundamentally have to do things differently. And by the way, it's not just with regard to war powers and AUMFs. There are other powers that Congress has ceded to various administrations that we need to reclaim. Not because this is a power struggle, it's because the Constitution says that this is what we're supposed to do. So we all respect the Constitution. So thank you.
Thank you. Let me add, Rachel, to this, that, the House has always led on these issues in terms of the repeal of both. We've included the amendments, the language, both in NDAA and in our appropriations bill several times. It always gets stuck in the Senate. And so the House is leading once again. Now, I have had conversations with Senator Kane, and we hope that this year, given that he's one of our strongest Senate allies, that especially when our legislation moves over, that we will have a coordinated legislative strategy, which actually we're beginning right now. So thank you for that question.
I was just going to add, Barbara, in terms of what a new authorization might look at, and I think many of us on this call and many of us in the House feel this way. A new authorization should be limited in time, as Anthony was saying, with a sunset. Should be limited in geography, so it specifies where the force can be used. Should be limited by identifying with specificity the targets against whom force can be used. The 2001 authorization talked about Al-Qaeda. It's been used against ISIS, which didn't even exist at the time of that authorization. And it should require consultation with Congress and reporting and notifications to Congress. I think those are some of the very basic elements that we would look for, among other things, in a new authorization.
Yeah, and we actually crafted our letter to the president with exactly what Chairman Schiff just mentioned. And so we have, in many ways, informally amongst ourselves, but formally to the president, indicated and our suggestions in terms of what a new authorization would look like. I believe, Sean, Ellen Chen has been on. Ellen, can you see Ellen, Sean?
Hi.
Hi, Ellen.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. So my question is for all of you, actually, because not just on this year's strike, President Biden strike in Syria, but also President Trump's strike against Iran last year. Both sides of the aisle have expressed very upset emotion of them not notifying Congress beforehand. So I have a question for all of you, especially for Chairman Schiff. I was wondering if you would consider adding any punity for presidents if they don't notify the Gang of Eight beforehand.
You mean add some form of liability for a president that doesn't make a prior notification? Is that your question?
Yes, I would. Yes,
yeah.
I was thinking if you would like to add any measures, any amendments of that.
Well, I can say just in terms of the two incidents you mentioned, we did not get notification regarding Soleimani. We did get notification regarding President Biden's strike beforehand, but it was not effective notification. And we've communicated that to the White House. And, Frank, I think the only way for Congress to hold the administration accountable effectively, I don't know that we could somehow make a president liable, but we can use our funding to insist that a president provide consultation and notification to Congress, even for actions that are authorized or actions that the president may believe that he can take under Article 2 to defend the country. And if the president doesn't fulfill what Congress believes is necessary, Congress can deprive the administration of funding for things it really wants and to continue conducting operations. So I think, we need to be, working collaboratively with the White House, but we also need to be willing to use our our funding power to make sure that these constitutional requirements are being followed.
Chairman Meeks, would you like to comment? Unmute. Can you unmute? Thank you.
I agree with Chairman Schiff. The notification was not effective and by the current administration. And I did voice my concern to them in that regards also. And they also had 48 hours to give us a further explanation in a non-classified form, which they did. And then time and ticking so that they would then give us further clarification of the need for the strike in a classified session. So we need to make sure that that is held to, but Chairman Schiff is absolutely right. Ultimately, the power that we have in Congress is the power of the purse. And to be clear that if in fact they are violating what the War Powers Resolution states and do not give us the notification as determined by the Constitution, that we will utilize the power that we ultimately have, and that is of the purse.
Congressman Brown?
Yeah, let me just add that, and there are several questions that were asked in the chat kind of related to this and, around airstrikes. Those often create, really difficult set of questions. What is it? Not only what's the authorization, but was there a clear justification? And those airstrikes are often presented to Congress either through notification or after the fact as an act of self-defense. And we're always going to have a good debate around whether or not it was really warranted in self-defense. But when you look at what we're here today to discuss in terms of the 2002 AUMF and the 2001 AUMF and the framework for AUMFs, a lot of the focus is for, are we committing our military in the kinds of activities that result in these forever wars, these perpetual morphing wars that go from country to country to country and result in the commitment of tremendous amount of treasure and blood by the United States. And so the issues of strikes and notification, consultation, and Congress's recourse are very important. But let's, I don't want to lose sight of why I think we're really here today, and that is what's the framework to prevent these forever wars, these operations that metastasize into 20-year wars across 7 countries.
Yes, and my statements, Ellen, subsequent to this latest strike, was that this is exactly why we need to repeal the authorizations and have Congress reassert its authority and duty and responsibilities under the Constitution. And in fact, it doesn't matter whether we have a Democratic president or a Republican president in the White House. It's extremely important for Congress to be the say what is based on what the Constitution requires in terms of our constitutional requirement. And so once again, I think this has brought the attention with regard to the public as to why these authorizations need to be repealed and why we need to have Congress debate and authorize or not the use of force. We will close now, and I just want to thank everyone for being with us, for your questions, our members who are doing so much work on this and have been for so many years on national security issues, on issues of war and peace, and want to just remind everyone that right now in 2021, only no more than 25% of members of Congress serving now were here in 2001 and 2002. And so the more we educate the public, and the public's with us and has been with us in terms of their support for repealing and these authorizations and ensuring that Congress does its job, we need to continue to educate our colleagues with regard to this, because again, less than 25% of members serving now were here in 2001 and 2002. And just an example though, on my resolution to repeal the 2002, already we have this year 90 co-sponsors, and it is bipartisan. And so I think the public has weighed in and is weighing in on why we must do our job as members of Congress, as members of the People's House, and as members who represent their views as it relates to matters of war and peace. So thank you all again very much. Thank you to the press. Thank you to members. Really appreciate the time we've had together today.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank
Take
you.
care,
And
Adam.
thank you
Take
to
care,
our
Greg.
Thank you,
staff.
everybody.
Thank you.